So thank you for the invite and thank you for that introduction, which we discussed earlier, and it was not the case. However, I've been given an opportunity to talk briefly about some monitoring in SEQ, and I've sort of adapted what I normally talk about in the sense of treatment trains, which is obviously the focus of this forum. Sweet. So it's just an overview of the monitoring that occurs in southeast Queensland and in GBR catchments. And I just want to give a bit of background to start with of why we exist and why the monitoring exists, and set the scene. So in SEQ, the catchments are worth about $5 billion from a tourism industry, recreation and fishing point of view. There's a huge amount of Ramsar listed areas, Moreton Bay specifically, which is massive. There's increased pressure from population, which is obvious. And the climate is extremely variable. You wouldn't possibly think that, but we do go from massive droughts to massive floods in recent years. We know about that. But also we get 120 mils can happen in 6 hours, 8 hours. It's dynamic. The catchments are significantly degraded. I think if you look at the Healthy Waterways report card, that's evident. And there's quite a lot of system repair that is needed. That's the bad story. It's not all bad. To manage all of this, to make it all happen, there's two key documents, the Southeast Queensland Regional Plan and the NRM Plan. And there's a target in there that all waterways are meant to achieve by 2031, their water quality objectives. That's very aspirational, but it's a journey that we should all be on. Now over to Great Barrier Reef. Iconic. We all know about the GBR. Beautiful, wonderful, huge economic import, the economy, and yet again, also a very highly variable climate, more so than southeast Queensland, where you're going all the way from, say, Cape York, which has floods and droughts, to the wet tropics, which is constant rainfall, constant flowing rivers, down to, say, the lower Burdekin or the Burdekin, which can 1 year discharge 8% of its annual volume, and then the next year 700%. To manage in the reef sense, there's two key areas, two documents. There's a long-term sustainability plan, which is all about ensuring the outstanding universal value of the reef and that it's here to stay. And inside the LTSP 2050, we have Reef Plan. And Reef Plan is nothing new. It's been around since 2003. Every few years it gets a reiteration. We do a scientific consensus statement, improve our knowledge, and then reset our vision, mission and purpose. But the goal has not changed, and it's all about protecting the reef from a health point of view, ensuring its resilience. So the next time the cyclones come around, or the next coral bleaching event, which is occurring right now, that it can bounce back, that it's as healthy as possible. And the thing that we can control is water quality. Here are the current targets, and they're under review. I think most in the room would understand these targets or know of these targets. So there's a focus on inorganic nitrogen, sediment and particulate nutrients, and also pesticides. And to achieve those water quality targets, which is the aim, we have some on-ground targets about riparian extent, ground cover. And what I'm going to pitch is maybe an innovative, novel, new way, maybe 20% adoption of treatment trains needs to be a target. Not saying it's endorsed, but it's an option. We heard from Tony and from Claire this morning, we need to think outside the box. Jeff Garrett has said, let's think outside the box. To achieve these targets, we're going to need multiple, as soon as it comes up, multiple interventions. We use multiple lines of evidence to show that water quality is an issue and the reef is at risk. We need multiple interventions to achieve those targets. And it's awesome this forum is happening, because I think in this room we can come up with those multiple interventions. It's not just about BMP, although that is essential. It's about some other options as well. The conceptual diagram is also under review, and I'm yet again going to pitch that maybe in that conceptual diagram we have some treatment trains, maybe some areas where we look at retention basins capturing all the farm runoff, or we look at underground bioreactors that fence off entire cane areas. I don't know, that's extreme, but let's put it on the table. But can I emphasize, through any monitoring and evaluation, if you don't measure, you cannot manage. So it's pointless doing any of this work without having some good measurements, some good understanding, some good fundamental science behind it all. So I'm just going to talk generally about some water quality things that we see in these catchments and sort of set the scene of what kind of treatment trains you can possibly use, because you do different treatment trains. I'm no expert in treatment trains, but I can imagine you'd use different treatment trains depending on what your focus or what your scope is. So the treatment trains that we adopt or use need to have, obviously, predefined objectives. And my question is, are we focusing on loads? Are we focusing on peak concentrations, so the maximum concentrations or the 95th percentile concentrations that we're seeing in these systems, or concentration duration? And the reason why I ask that is, there's some rules of thumb when you're talking about biological effects and exceedance, especially with toxicants, and we'll put pesticides and even nitrate in that category there. The greater the exceedance above the threshold, maybe it's an ANZAC ARMCAN's guideline, the more severe the biological threat. The longer that exceedance happens, the more severe the biological threat. And the more times that exceedance happens, so the repeated pulses, the more severe the biological threat. So you just need to have that in the back of your mind with how we're treating this water. Then when we come to like catchment dynamics, water quality varies. It'd be nice to say that we could just have an average for every catchment, every stream, under every condition. It just doesn't happen. Each catchment is unique, each stream is unique, each spot along a river or creek is unique. Concentrations and loads vary during ambient flow and in event conditions during flood conditions. I think that's logical. But it's not always as logical as you think. You would think, oh, maybe in event conditions the concentrations are always high. It's not the case, and I'll show you some data in a minute. There's the first flush phenomenon. So that first flush of those streams in the year, highest concentrations. That's pretty much universal around everywhere. And those concentrations can be pretty bad. Pesticides, bit of a unique one. They don't have a flow relationship. We call it a dissipation curve. So it's all about application time to first runoff. Okay? Pesticides degrade, they have a half-life, and it's all about when that rain happens and where that application was depending on the concentration. So you're not going to get this lovely flow concentration relationship where you can just get an average concentration, times it by flow, and get beautiful loads. It doesn't work that way. Systems exhaust. I've been up at the Ballyando River, which is out in the Burdekin. 6 metres of water flowing through about 800 metres, put your hand in 10 centimetres, can't see my hand. 5 months later, same level of water, same flow, hand in, crystal clear all the way through the bottom. Systems do exhaust. Some systems are continually flowing, whether they're artificially made that way, say by the lower Burdekin in the flood irrigation area of sugarcane, where systems would normally be dry most of the year, now they're constantly flowing, or the wet tropics. The Russell-Mulgrave River, just south of Cairns, about 3 months of the year, you start to get a bit of salt incursion back up. The other 9 months, the water pumping out of there is around about 50 microsiemens. It is fresh and it is just constant. And land use, there is a strong link of land use to water quality issues. So classic ones are diuron, sugarcane, tebuthyron, grazing, sediment, grazing, nutrients, cane. Generalised, but that's generally the story. I've said water quality is site specific, and all treatment trains should be site specific. So just quickly into some data, just to back up my outlandish statements. I'm only going to talk about dissolved inorganic nitrogen and one pesticide. We haven't got time to go through all the things we report on, but if you want to grab me at any stage or get me to present, I'm happy to present on anything. So it's the devil in the detail, without a doubt, okay? So this is a pie chart, and we've got Cape York all the way down to the Burnett Mary. This is the Reef focus right now. And we've got all the catchments in between. I have lumped some catchments up just because of the story is not really there. And this is the annual average loads of dissolved inorganic nitrogen, so tonnes per year, okay, coming out of each of these catchments. I've just categorised the red ones. The red ones are wet tropics, blue is the Burdekin, Fitzroy, the green is Mackay Sundays, and the orange kind of area is like your Burnett Mary. So it's just categorised by region for colour. The reason why I've done this is straight away you look and you go, okay, wet tropics, dissolved in organic nitrogen, let's call it a third, maybe nearly over a third, nearly half really, of the dissolved in organic nitrogen is coming from the wet tropics. A couple of reasons, obviously the agriculture, also huge amounts of rainfall, huge amounts of flow, huge amounts of delivery. But there's another story behind that. Burdekin, big chunk, same with Fitzroy, not so much out of the Mackay Sundays, which is interesting because that's also another heavy agricultural area. When you break that down and you look at what's punching above its weight, so this is a yield, this is tonnes per kilometre squared, and this is important because if you want to focus a treatment train, you want to get your biggest bang for your buck. You want to really go in where you can get the biggest reductions. The wet tropics, which is that red colour, we're talking now 2/3 pretty much. 70% of the load is coming from the wet tropics. And then Mackay Sunday starts to rear its head. And yet again, it's because of the agricultural footprint. Now, nothing's ever simple. We talk about dissolved organic nitrogen. When you look at something from the Fitzroy and the Tully and you compare them, you would think, and the convention is that most of the load is delivered during the flow conditions. And that is a generalised statement and generally true. Although with dissolved organic nitrogen, most of the load is not in event conditions. It's also in the ambient conditions, so when the river is not influenced by rainfall or flood. So that's important when we're thinking about how we treat the water. It's not going to try and capture the river. Is there another story there? But when you look at something like the Fitzroy, a massive catchment, only 10 to 15% of that load is delivered in ambient conditions. So yet again, treatment trains, you can't just use one. That's exactly the same concept in the Fitzroy and in the Tully and achieve the same outcome. The reason for this is a hydrograph. So the blue line is the water rising and falling. The red dots are concentrations, grab samples in the stream of nitrate, nitrite, or dissolved in organic nitrogen without ammonia. And the purple dots are sediment, or total suspended solids. You don't get this positive relationship with the flow from the nitrate. So as the river rises, the concentration goes down. So the runoff from the catchments in the Tully is cleaner than the ambient condition. I think you all probably know where I'm going here. Same happened in this event, happens every event except for one event, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's groundwater. Now, it's not traditional groundwater. It's not 30 metres down below the surface pumping up. It's this perched kind of interaction layer. We have heavy rainfall that hits down. There's lots of drain networks up in that region, and it pumps out into the river. Sediment, however, flow, erosion, rainfall, it does follow that convention. And just so that I'm not making it up, you look at the Tully, the Fitzroy, and that relationship of ambient and groundwater is not there, which then supports our hypothesis or the data that the ambient loads out of the Fitzroy is only 10 to 15%. However, it's always never as easy as you think. This is the Tully again. This is dissolved in organic nitrogen. It's just a regression plot. There's two different sets of data that you get on an average throughout the year. Every year, a first flush in the Tully does have a positive relationship with flow. And that's that first flush phenomenon. Then you take that away and you get this beautiful regression line of decreasing concentration with increasing velocity and volume discharge. And then to complicate things, if you go into Tully Gorge National Park, where it's not modified by land use, so the green line is a hydrograph at Tully Gorge, the blue line is the hydrograph down at Tully Urimo, which is impacted by agriculture. You get a positive relationship with flow from dissolved organic nitrogen, which is what I've said doesn't happen, but in the natural sense it does happen. But at an impacted site or a modified system, you get that negative relationship. And then we move on to pesticides, and I've got one flow example of pesticides, but I just wanted to highlight there's three kind of focus areas for pesticides from a peak concentration point of view. So basically, in summary, these bar graphs, it's a maximum that's been detected in the catchment. It's not a concentration. This is a way that we take all the pesticide results, we crunch it into one number, and we compare it to the potentially affected amount of species. So if you're looking in a system to use Anzac arm cans to protect 95% of species, and you're hitting 90% of species, you're slightly off the mark. So this is a good focus area for pesticides because these kind of numbers need to dramatically come down. And this is the kind of relationship you see in a pesticide sense from a site. This is Tully again. This is the chemical called imidacloprid. They use this chemical for cane grub to protect their crop. It's a neonicotinoid. If you know anything about this chemical, heavily banned or suspended or controlled in Europe and other places. In Australia, we don't control it as much as we probably should. But you get this dissipation curve. Now, this is a log scale, and you can sort of see it occurring there. High peak concentration at the start of the year. But if I just switch to a normal scale, you can really see this dissipation curve. Even though you get events here that are quite similar in nature, it's all about that application timing. So if you're doing a treatment train that's focusing on pesticides, it's about getting that to intercept the application time. Quickly into SEQ. It's nothing new that I haven't already told you. It's no real different to GBR. There is obviously a massive focus on sediment, and I'm not talking about sediment today, Southeast Queensland catchments, but treatment trains can obviously deal with sediment as well. But there are some hot spots, and there's one particular one I'm going to show you some data on in the Pumice-Stone area in Coochin Creek. So this is the catchment. We have our site here on Coochin Creek, and we also have a site here on Back Creek. Lots of intensive agriculture occurring through here. Obviously this discharges into the Pumice-Stone Passage, obviously quite unique, and Ramsar listed. Coochin Creek there, it's the catchment, so we're not capturing any of this kind of stuff in the data I'm about to show you. And then Back Creek, a tiny little catchment, about 10 kilometres squared. I would say the worst catchment in Queensland, but I don't monitor everywhere, so I can't definitely say that. We have some, if we had time, I could throw some real-time data here. We've got some nitrate probes in that site as well. But these are the values just on nitrogen coming out of Coochin and Back. So Back Creek's the up catchment that flows into Coochin Creek. And Back Creek contributes somewhere between 20 up to 73% of total nitrogen going out of Coochin from a tiny little 10 kilometre square catchment. It's quite significant. And then when you look at NOx and ammonia, it can be quite high, although I've only got 1 year of data. We're just doing a bit of pro bono monitoring through this area. When you compare that to, say, what I would consider one of the more, I don't want to say nasty things, not one of the best catchments in the reef world is Sandy Creek near Mackay. And we look at some differences. So this is yet again a yield. Sandy Creek, let's call it 1 for total nitrogen, 0.2 for NOx. And then you look at Back Creek from that tiny little catchment, 4 to 7 times the amount. You want to go and do some great wins, focus in there. You get some really big bangs for your buck. And just to throw up some stuff from Back Creek, this is nitrate data. Here's your Anzac cans trigger value as a toxicant. This isn't a water quality guideline or a water quality objective. This is the toxicant level. So above here, there is some risk to the environment of a toxic effect. You can see the kind of values. And there's some other data that's not ours. Sunny Coast have presented, and the groundwater in that area, it's the same story as what we're seeing in the Tully, 38, 40, 42 milligrams per litre of nitrate. That's pretty huge. And yes, there's a pesticide issue in Back Creek as well. Some bromacil, some diarom problems. Haloxyflop, which is not on there, that's been a recent one that's starting to come up and rear its head. And if you want any more info on Reef, go to Reef Plan, and for SEQ, just Healthy Waterways website. It's got all our stuff. And that's it. Thank you.